Spending time with Teresa of Avila is like finding yourself with an extraordinarily famous person who bustles into your kitchen and makes a cup of tea, laughing as she does about some funny incident along the way. Then she plonks herself down at your kitchen table, takes a breath, and dispenses some incredible prophetic advice and gold standard theology. That's what Jill Duff writes about St. Teresa of Avila. We're making our way through this book, Held in God's Gaze, with its two authors, Jill Duff and Nicholas Heale, who are with me here. And we're going to think about two saints, the Spanish mystics, St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross. So first of all, Jill, tell us a little bit about Teresa of Avila and what attracted you to her.
I have just been drawn to her writing. She is almost the most homely and most accessible of the saints. I feel I'm quite like her in personality, actually, and I was very excited about doing this filming today, so I leapt in the car and said to Nicholas, I think I'm going to be very Teresa today, actually.
That'll be very, very John.
Which probably sums up our characters, really. But she writes about the spiritual life in such a homely way, using lots of just very normal ways of speaking about things. So I've been drawn to her because, as we were speaking about in the last video, I'm from the more charismatic part of the church where kind of phenomenon, spiritual manifestations can in some ways be a big part of the journey. And yet she has this beautiful practical way about speaking of them that actually often they're a sign of immaturity. And as we grow more mature, we don't want to let the pot boil over. You want to put fire underneath it, but you don't want it to spill its contents everywhere. And I love that sense that we can so easily spill our contents.
So, Nicholas, tell us a bit about John and Teresa. When were they alive? What were the circumstances of their lives? What was the background?
So they lived in 16th century Spain. They are in the generation after the Reformation had happened. So one of the things that's really, really important about their spiritual life is that it was in the context of a church that was very, very aware of its dividedness and brokenness and of the risks of division and brokenness within the church. And they were part of a renewal movement in the religious orders, the monastic orders, which felt that a kind of a spirit of complacency had perhaps come upon the church. Perhaps a spirit of self-indulgence and that the church had lost its way a little bit and needed to be called back to its first principles. So they both were involved in the reform of the religious life in their Carmelite convents. They were friends of each other. Teresa of Avila was a nun in the Convent of the Incarnation in Avila itself. And for a while, John was the chaplain. And you can still go to the little room in Avila where they met and see the chair he sat on and where they spoke about the things of the Spirit. They were temperamentally very, very different, as you comment, Bishop Jill.
So what was John's temperament then?
John is a self-contained, measured, introverted person. In a way that Teresa is an effusive and extrovert and gushing person. Our two temperaments in some ways do reflect them. Not that we are anything like as exalted as Teresa and John themselves. But they found that they complemented each other. And there are lovely anecdotes of times when Teresa says to John, oh, for goodness sake, have a laugh. Don't be so intense. And he says to her, well, Teresa, you're getting a bit carried away with things then, steady down. So they balance each other. And I think the two of them alongside each other see things in multiple perspectives. Teresa writing very, very much about the wonder that there is to receive the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and John giving the word of caution that we don't allow those to become some kind of idol.
Let's pick up that. Teresa the charismatic. How does she experience the gifts of the Spirit, Jill?
Well, I think, as I understand it, her faith suddenly became quite alive, didn't it, in her 30s, where she did experience what she would call locutions and what we might call gifts of tongues and a sense of quite the sort of mystical encounters with Jesus. But she can I put it? She puts it in such a kind of homely and normal, a normal way, and not in an exalted sense of doing things. And she would often speak, when the soul is mature, God will lead it into the desert. And she writes as she speaks, I think. There's a lovely quote about, I wish I had two hands so I could write and think at the same time. I kind of love that sense. And in her time of reforms, the church was tearing itself apart. She was endlessly in quite difficult situations, and yet she had this sort of determination to keep going in an extraordinary way.
So she was, there were deep experiences of pain, weren't there, in Teresa's life? And,
There was.
And how are they valuable to us? What has that taught you? What does that teach us?
I find her writings the way of perfection, which she wrote for kind of lay women wanting to explore a deeper spiritual life, and how she narrates the cross and the place of pain. I find that second to none. She says, if you want to see how God treats those who say your will be done from the heart, look at what he did to his son, but then see if his will was not perfectly fulfilled through all the trials and the hardships, because he gave him his kingdom while he was still alive. And I just wonder whether for me that's been a narration of he doesn't give us earthly honours and glories, but actually in sharing the sufferings of Jesus is a cost of seeing his kingdom while we're still alive.
Yeah, thank you. And John had quite a tough time as well, even in prison at points.
He was in prison.
He used the phrase the dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
Much used, much misunderstood. What does it mean?
Well, let me start with a comment on John's vision of what the night is. He, from his prison cell, remembers going out into the garden at night time, when you can see all of the stars and you can smell the scent of the flowers. And there is this extraordinary sense of being gathered into what is transcendent beyond us. And first of all, his image of the night is like that. It's the place where we encounter the unspeakable mystery of the dawning in our consciousness of the love of God. But because it's a time of darkness, it's also a very, very powerful image for those times when we feel tested. And John refers in his writings to the dark night of the senses and the dark night of the soul. And in the dark night of the senses, this is the time when God allows our senses to be refined. And we were talking in another conversation about the Desert Fathers and the way in which they make it their business, the Desert Fathers and Mothers, they make it their business to address the pull of the worst self towards pride and anger and lust and greed and so on and so forth. Whilst those capacities for vice within us are being refined, John experiences that as a kind of experience of the night, as we're being tested, as we're being refined, as we're being purified.
So it's not being lost, it's not losing your way.
Absolutely.
No.
It's the necessary process for us genuinely to find our way into the greater encounter with the love of God. So the destination is always for the greater knowledge of the love of God. And it's that which gives John and Teresa the spiritual resilience to face the darkness, to face the testing, because they know that everything is held in God's gaze.
In God's gaze, yes.
In the love of God.
And he had an extraordinarily difficult childhood, didn't he? And the experience in the prison cell was, again, absolutely brutal by his own order. And I love he writes incredible poetry, and has a lovely line about the fire of God's Spirit actually cauterizing our wounds. And I think that's a beautiful image.
He also talks about prostrating himself before the Lord, doesn't he? That's an important imagery. Why is that such an important part of his spirituality?
Well, there's in his interpretation of, there's a specific text in the Book of Lamentations where the prophet feels that everything has been lost and all there is left to do is to bow down on the ground before God, that there may be hope. I don't know whether you've experienced on Good Friday, which is a day when some of us will literally prostrate ourselves on the sanctuary floor. It's one of the most vivid and powerful gestures of the year, which until we have done it, we can't quite know how it will be for us. I spend a lot of time among Muslim friends because of the parish I work in at the moment. And when I am in the mosque and everybody prostrates themselves, it has come to, I have come to understand the way in which when we are lowered, abased, absolutely to the ground, there is nothing between us and the almighty majesty of God. If we stand, or as we are here now, there's everything that's going on around us, between us and God. So what looks from the outside as the place of abjection actually becomes the place of the most profound and intimate encounter with the living God. It's as if all of the worldly stuff has been put on one side, so that instead of being distracted by it, we can be filled with the knowledge of the presence of God.
It can all feel a bit in at the deep end, can't it, with John and Teresa? I think lots of people think of them and it's doom and it's gloom and it's quite hard going. So tell us both, where's the joy in John and Teresa? Where's the joy in these two saints?
Oh, well, Teresa's very good at making jokes, isn't she? And she's literally... I was reading her last night, actually, and I just kind of laughed out loud at some of the turns of phrase that she uses, really. And she kind of laughs in the midst of trials. I think there's a famous story of her being thrown out of a cart, and she says, "Look, Lord, if this is how you treat your friends..."
No wonder you've got so few friends.
That's all what it is.
Yes.
Yeah, so that sort
Very
of thing.
down to earth spiritual wisdom.
Yeah.
Yes.
John, if we read his poetry, is one of the great poets of love and of intimacy and of tenderness and of the exquisite beauty of closeness. And some people find it almost too intense, the intimacy with which he writes of the delight of the love of God. So although there are the heavy themes of the dark nights, everything starts from and ends with that image of the garden at night time, which is full of the allure of something wonderful, the eternal splendour of the skies, the scent of the flowers, the sound of the fellow creatures, which are just a little bit beyond our capacity to see or to touch or to feel, and this being taken beyond ourselves into the place of wonder. That is really the main subject matter of John of the Cross, and overlaps with the effusive and really life-filled energy, which is right at the heart of the testimony of Teresa.
That's lovely. So who's going to pray us out? John or Teresa?
You have a prayer from
Teresa is going to...
Teresa,
This is her... was I found on her bookmark in her prayer book when she had died. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing away. God never changes. Patience obtains all things. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.